Mary Meet, Annie here, back with another topic suggested by a viewer. I've done an earlier video on my relationship with and the way she came to me when it comes to my matron, Hestia. And I'll link that in the text box below. I looked at it again. Man, it's really weird to look at yourself in videos. I don't usually go back to old videos. But I think I did a pretty good job with this one, even though it's been a while back. So I'm linking it in case you have more of an interest in, well, how the heck did Hestia even come about and who is she to me? But I'll put the full text of my viewer's question in the text box below this video. But there were some specific questions which I'm going to address, and of course they will probably take me off into some wanderings. So the first question was, this is regarding matrons and patrons in general. Is it a matter of having a spirit guide that is auxiliary to your traditional god and goddess? Yes and no. For me, Hestia, well, she's more than a guide. She is an entity in reality. And I really have to say, when I share relationships I have with deities who are not always from the Greek tradition, which was the heritage I have with my first coven, which honored the Greek pantheon. Some of my matrons and now patrons, and I get to tell you about that later, are from various pantheons. Not honored as they would have been in their time and in their culture. You know, I get asked a lot when people find out that some of the gods I work with are, well, outside of the pantheons they might expect me to work with. Am I in the midst of an appropriation of those deities? And I am not. I don't know how each of you describe your relationship to deity. But even deities that come from the heritage that is my blood heritage, I didn't know them thousands of years ago. I wasn't there to worship them. I can learn about their culture, and I can come to understand them as best as I can from the lens of who they were and their importance to the peoples that are part of my roots. But even in that case, what I relate to isn't the historical God. It's whatever aspect of the greater sense of the divine, both male and female, and to my mind, non-gendered at the highest level, that makes itself known to me, that moves through that into something which takes form. I always say it's simplistically something I can look into the eyes of. It's a personal relationship. I created it. In the creation of it, something comes to me. I have no doubt that it's the historical deity that comes to me, even if it's a deity that's not of my root blood heritage. Although, of course, some deities aren't going to come to you if you are not that kind of intimate member of their family. So I have had powerful relationships with gods from many different pantheons, and since I'm going to mention a couple of them in this video, I thought I wanted to share my thoughts on appropriation. I don't feel the need to do a long video on that topic, but I did want to mention that I honor them as they have come to me. The stories about them inspire me, therefore the archetype of them. But also, I have a feeling that for many deities, when there is some part of them that you've come to understand, and it is truly who they are, they will choose what aspects of themselves to present to you, even if you're not a devotee to their particular time and culture. So I've said that now, haven't I? Back to the question. When it comes to matrons and patrons, is it a matter of having a spirit guide that is auxiliary to your traditional god and goddess? And my answer was yes and no. And by that I mean they stand alone. They're not auxiliary as in addition to, and I wouldn't call them a spirit guide. I would say that I relate to many god forms as archetype. But then every now and then, one comes along who I've either desperately reached out for, or who has just come and tapped me on the shoulder, or hit me over the head with a brick, whatever they needed to do to get my attention. And in that case, it's not a guide or a spirit essence. It is a specific entity. So, Hestia being my matron. She's not auxiliary to the goddess that I conceive of at the next level, the next hierarchy of deity. But she certainly is, in her reality, in her existing as an entity in her own right, she's a reflection of that greater form of the Godhead, of the goddess head in this case. I don't need to define for myself if that level of deity, of the goddess or the god, is a sum of all my experiences of the deities, such as Hestia and etc., or whether they're a fragment of it that makes itself known to me. I don't care which one of those situations it is. It equally feels as real and tangible to me looking at it from either of those two perspectives. There's something to ask the rest of you when you work with individual gods and goddesses. How do they fit into your wider concept of the divine? You might not have a wider concept of the divine if you're not like me, that has a large family of deities that inspire me, and then a male and female separate, distinct entity that's older than all that, in a way, that represents the polarity and the duality of the one. That's where I might have some differences from many of you when it comes to my concept of the one. So I hope that answers your question about, is Hestia a spirit guide? No, she's a separate sentient entity, as I've come to know her. And is she auxiliary to the god and the goddess? Yes, if you mean complementary. She provides ways to explore them further, that's for sure. But not quite on the same level, but also not something which is much less than, if that makes sense. Is she the specific aspect of goddess that you worship in your solitary practice? First and foremost, I worship the goddess and the god in my solitary practice. So she would not be a specific aspect of goddess that I worship in my solitary practices, because I think the last question explained that. She is at the same time an aspect of goddess and therefore of the one. And at the same time, and I have no problems with the paradox of there being two realities here, she's also separate in her own and on her own. Does she show up, for instance, when I go to rituals elsewhere? Not usually. Not usually. There's been times I've felt her at the edge of circle, but she respects the energy of whatever circle I'm participating in, and whatever deity we're honoring, and whatever guides we're honoring in that circle. Is she an archetype that you feel drawn to, that you find to be particularly meditative? You know, that might have been an origin call for me, the way she may have been making herself known to start with. Reading her stories. And I'm thinking also of the other deities who have made themselves known to me at a personal level. Understanding their time and their culture as much as possible. Understanding who they were then. Understanding the power of archetype and what they represented of the collective wisdom of all time, not just historically when they were born and when they were worshipped. So in a way, it is an archetype. I'd say an archetype in the first, hey Annie, pay attention, that step into my involvement with my matrons and patrons. My understanding of a lot of deity stays at that place. Wisdom, collective consciousness, wisdom of the ages, wisdom of all who've gone before, and actually reflections in my own psyche of that kind of inner wisdom. So a lot of deity gets to that point, and that's where I need it to be. And then every now and then, whether I create it in my own way and in my own form, or whether some aspect of what it is historically reaches out to me, or whether some aspect of the goddess or the god makes itself known to me through that archetype, it all ends up in the same place. A separate, sentient, seeable, feelable, relatable, conversable deity that I have a relationship with. Or is she just a reminder of your time in your British traditional coven, serving as a touchstone for exploration and discovery? And I think there's a yes and no to that too. Because what I learned in my search for her, which I share in the video that I've linked below, does connect me to that time and to my early explorations in who the gods might be to me. So she does connect me to that time and into how I developed my way of exploration and inquiry into an understanding of all the many appearances of God and Goddess throughout time and history and throughout cultures. So it does connect me to that time in my early training when I was a baby witch. And let's see, was she a reminder of that time? Yes, in the sense of what I learned in my search for her. She was the first deity that I had that kind of intimate relationship with. And then serving as a touchstone for exploration and discovery. Absolutely. And also a touchstone for exploration and discovery from then to now and beyond. What I went through getting to find her, to being aware of her presence, to having the sense of who she was outside of me and who she was in me, very much a technique that, whether I intentionally applied it going forward to exploration of other God forms, I definitely started it in those days and kind of set my pattern and how I might do that. So the video that I'm attaching, I think, if I remember correctly, was done in 2016, perhaps. At that point, I reported that I was definitely had my matron and that I was intentionally seeking out a patron. And I give you the reasons why I probably hadn't felt drawn to that. I've since learned that one of the reasons I wasn't drawn to that was most of the mythology that you read about regarding all of our deities, male and female, tends to be scratching at the surface level only. And I found it particularly difficult to go deeper in the mythology of the male gods. I've since taken it upon myself to not accept face value for any of them and to explore them deeper, just as I always have done with the goddesses. And therefore, some are making themselves very, very well known to me. I stand by everything that I've said in that earlier video. It still rings just as true for me. And I'd say that along the way, in the time since, in the time even leading up to that, and in the time since, and I hope in the time going forward, I assume so, that nothing's lost in the search for deeper understanding of any God form. What we learn about ourselves, what we learn about their cultures and times, we learn about contemporary paganism and how these ancient gods can fit in and be one with. And as I've mentioned before, how can they maybe allow us to have a greater understanding of the depth, the mystery that's part of however we consider that greater aspect of the Godhead, which I would declare as God and Goddess and ultimately the One. Regarding matrons and patrons, both, nothing's happened that's changed my mind from what I shared in that earlier video, which is they should inspire and challenge us. I think it's a mistake when we look for a matron or a patron that we find interesting, that might comfort us, that we might think, oh, isn't that nice? I think they have a role to play that's much more important than that. They're kind of like the elders that we know in our lives who hold us accountable and challenge us, and they just don't take any crap from us. And it seems to me that matrons and patrons fall in that kind of area. I think that we shouldn't see them as perfect. I think I referenced them in the former video that even they can have feet of clay. And I think it's the ones that they have a story that is of challenges. Let's just say they're the hero in their own journey. They've been presented with a series of challenges which they overcome and their sacrifices along the way, and they become who they are. Very human in that way. Those are the gods that call out to me the most powerfully. Not the elevated, I'm up here and I'm perfect and don't you think I'm just way cool and wouldn't you like to have me as a matron or a patron. Almost the humanity within these gods is what I find extremely important. Maybe because then I can relate to them and it's easier for me to be in relationship with them. I think they give us an example that when they're at their best is an example of who we can be at our best. And then when they're not at their best, it reminds us that I've got that in me too. I think when we reach out for matrons and patrons, there's two things that we look for: a mirror of our own strengths and the things that we aspire to. So in a way they reflect us. Maybe that's why we recognize them. Maybe that's why we build a story around them. But also, and you can seek them out because there's something about them that you know you need to know. And you have a sense they can guide you through that. I want to say in my time since, it's become more and more obvious to me that there is room for more than one matron or patron. Mine have interestingly been settled down into the elemental quarters of the year. I think I mentioned in my earlier video that where I was at that point was Kuan Yin, Hestia, and Parvati. And since then, and really only in the last couple of years, Hecate kind of reached out and grabbed me, and like with many of the deities who have spoken to me personally, it's because I just came to understand their most ancient history, who they were before some aspect of contemporary culture and society, usually post-classical Greece, for instance, for the Greek deities. Who were they in their history? And if I get a sense of that and I find enough sources and I can explore and then I can open myself up to what does that mean, I find that there's room for... I still have a singular matron. I still begin and end all my rituals, all my meditations, all my workings in relationship with Hestia. But the other four are very present in my life. I also have had a sense as I've gone along that, you know that saying about people, that we know some people for a reason, some people for a season, and some people for a lifetime? I think that also applies to these matron and patron god forms. We might need them for a while. We might think we need them forever, but we might find out that it was just for a particular purpose that they spoke to us, that we saw something in them that we needed, that we learned from them in a certain instance. Then some are here for a while. They serve a purpose and then they ease away. Sometimes it's hard to accept when you realize that easing away is happening. Some are here for a lifetime. I honestly think that the four who have become aligned to the four elemental seasons of the year for me, Hestia, Parvati, Kuan Yin, and Hecate, are probably going to be with me the rest of my life. But I could find out that that's not so in every instance. The only one I know absolutely without a doubt I will die and she will be there when I pass over is Hestia. If you're interested, my matron deities have fallen down into these quarters, elemental quarters of the year. Hecate is earth, Parvati is air, Hestia is fire, and Kuan Yin is water. So let's talk about patrons. I was on a search for patron when I did that video 3-4 years ago, whatever it was. And, well, guess what? I now have, I'd say 8 that have become very personal and very real to me. 4 who have settled in as most powerful and aligned to quarters of the year. And those are Hades for earth, Hermes for air, Mars for fire, and Hephaestus for water. That might seem like an odd alignment for you, Hephaestus for water, but in the way my turning of the year goes, Mars is about the passion that informs your skill and what you'll make of it. And Hephaestus is the devotion to it, the making it happen. So they are fire into water for me. Thought they'd mention that because most of us, when we think of Hephaestus, we think of fire. He's very water for me. And here's the thing. Hades is becoming present to me year round. Year round. He shows up in my meditation. He shows up in my workings. He's become as real and tangible to me as Hestia, and has the same level of devotion from me. So while he may be present to me, especially in the turning of the wheel, which is Earth, he is also present to me year-round in more ways than I can possibly describe. I don't know if any additional matrons or patrons will come my way. There are so many who are asking me to listen to their stories and to explore them that I would think I'll be busy for a while. I do know that my personal practice has expanded by leaps and bounds as my relationship with these gods and the additional, like I said, there's a total of 8 that have been particularly vocal to me. And off the top of my head, I'm thinking, who were the other ones? Obatala, Toth. So there's my answers to this viewer's questions on matrons and patrons, which is kind of like what they mean to me and where I am in relationship to them. I'm open to any other questions that you might have that could be a follow-up video to this, and I hope this has been helpful to the original viewer. I want to add one more thing. I don't think we should limit ourselves, that if we don't develop a relationship with a particular God form that's, as I describe it, that personal, I see you, I hear you, I can look in your eyes, you are real and tangible to me. If that's not happening, but the wisdom of that God is speaking very, very powerfully to you, let yourself explore then, is it just an archetype? Because if you're feeling it that powerfully, it's probably something deeper than or different than merely an archetype. And I don't mean to belittle the power of archetype in what we do in all of our practices. I just want to encourage anyone who is like, oh gosh, Hades didn't walk into the room and shake my hand like he seems to have done with Annie. It doesn't have to be that way. There is power in their names. As I say in ritual, there's power in your ancient names. There's power in who they were, in their time and in their culture. There's power of who they are to any of us now and how they present themselves to us, what we come to understand of them. Whether that moves into some more mystical understanding of them as an entity, I don't think that lessens the power of them. I think we need to take them very, very seriously. Whenever we're drawn to one in particular, there is a reason. It might be for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And especially when it moves beyond a reason for now, beyond that into why you need to understand them going forward and why they need to be at your side for maybe your lifetime, that's probably the territory that becomes, well, who might they be then as specific deity and how might I relate to that? I hope that is helpful to our original viewer. I know I mentioned some things that were probably a little bit off that track, and would be glad to do any follow-up videos that y'all might have in mind for me. Just let me know. I wish you all best of luck in search for the wisdom of the gods that come to you in any way, shape, or form. And of course, I wish you mirth and reverence. Merry part.